Welcome back, everyone. Our speakers this afternoon will share perspectives from their states on building a performance-based regulatory environment that is favorable to the safe, secure, and efficient integration of RPAS operations alongside a well-established manned aircraft industry, examining potential regulatory and safety oversight solutions. The moderator of this session is Mr. Claude Hurley. As president of the ICAO Air Navigation Commission, Mr. Hurley leads the Commission's work on the development of international standards and recommended practices, as well as ICAO's global plans. Mr. Hurley has served as an ANC Commissioner at ICAO since February 2014 and has served as both a second ANC Vice President and its first Vice President. Prior to his commitments at ICAO, Captain Hurley was an executive with Transport Canada, where he managed and led teams with responsibilities in aviation safety regulatory oversight. Previously, he flew as a professional pilot for many years, first in the Canadian Armed Forces, where he served as a tactical pilot, peacekeeper, and search and rescue commander, as well as in communication and safety roles. Claude, the floor is yours.
Let's have fun. Thank you very much for coming back after what I'm sure was a lovely lunch, and I'm just thrilled to see so many people in the room. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here and to have a conversation together. But before we begin, a big thank you to our hosts, the People Government of Sichuan Province, and as well, I'd like to thank you, our participants today, as this is really about having a conversation on how best to build a future together that includes a safe integration of RPAS and UAS into a shared airspace, and we need your input, your advice, and your guidance as we find the safe path forward. We're here this afternoon to specifically discuss the question of building a performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS operations. Are states ready? You'll note that for all our speakers, that their full biographies are on the ICAO event app, and so to give the speakers more time to share with us their wise words, I'll but briefly summarize how their current work ties into the RPAS file and leave it up to you to check out their full bios. As such, first up, I'm very pleased to welcome as first speaker this afternoon, Mr. Everette Rochon, whose current position is as Manager of Flight Standards, General Aviation and Commercial Division with the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States. Mr. Rochon's presentation will help us start to build a shared understanding on the question of if states are ready for performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS operations. Mr. Rochon, if you please, you have the floor, sir.
Well, good afternoon, distinguished visitors, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm Everette Rochon, FAA, Acting Manager of the General Aviation and Commercial Division. I'd like to add my thanks to ICAO for the invitation, and I'd also like to add thanks to the City of Chengdu, this wonderful facility, as well. It's my first visit to China, and it's been a very memorable one, so I look forward to future visits for sure. So the question before us is building a performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS. Are states ready? So after hearing presentations from Boeing, Shell, UPS, I couldn't help feeling overwhelmed. I mean, I was thinking, are states ready? I was like, we better be, because they're moving at impressive speed in innovation. And as a regulator, that is very overwhelming. But I think that a performance-based regulatory structure is the key to success. So first, a little background and some statistics. We currently have 1.2 million drone registrations in the United States. And of course, the number of operations in the US are expected to dramatically increase over the coming years. Some additional statistics: we have 105,000 certificated small UAS remote pilots, and we've processed 12,000 operational waiver applications. So just to give you a sense, yesterday we had some briefings on the operational categorization scheme. So with respect to Part 107, Part 107 is roughly equivalent to Category A, and our operational waivers to Part 107 are roughly equivalent to Category B authorizations. So again, we processed 12,000 operational waiver applications over a 2-year period for operations such as night, beyond visual line of sight, and operations over people. So nearly 2,000 of those waiver applications have been approved. Most waiver application approvals have been for nighttime operations, but because of the air risk and ground risk that must be mitigated, the fewest waivers issued for operations over people and beyond visual line of sight. We've issued 14 waivers for operations over people and 21 for operations beyond visual line of sight. Additionally, large UAS, those over 55 pounds, are under our manned aircraft operations regulations. So those have to go through a totally different process for approval. Those go through an exemption process. So we have waivers under Part 107, and we have exemptions under Part 91. So you can tell by those numbers, the statistics that I gave, that case-by-case waivers and exemptions are not sustainable from a resource perspective in the FAA. We're still going to continue to follow our incremental approach to RPAS integration, and Part 107 was crucial in implementing commercial operations in the NAS. However, if we're going to successfully move from accommodation to integration, the future is not in the more segregated and prescriptive Part 107, nor are they in case-by-case exemptions and waivers. We feel the future is in the general aviation and air transportation regulatory standards that served the FAA well for many decades, but must be modified for unmanned operations. Additionally, we feel that performance-based regulations offer the flexibility that's needed in this regulatory environment. So what are the types of rules? There's generally 3 types of rules that we talk about in the FAA. There's prescriptive rules, and as you can see, they're very specific. They're what to do, how to do, and what to do it with. And then on the other end of the scale, there's principle-based rules, which are very conceptual rules, not very specific, broad concepts. But in the middle are performance-based rules that provide thresholds and targets. So we recognize as the FAA that industry is in the best position to determine how to meet those standards for the operations they conduct. And performance-based rules provide the best combination of advantages from prescriptive rules and principle-based rulemaking. So to understand principle versus performance-based rules a little bit better, I think we all kind of have a good concept of what prescriptive rules are and how specific they are. But here's an example using detect and avoid. So on the left side there, you have what would be considered a principle-based rule. So as you can see, very broad concept, not really specific targets. On the right-hand side, a performance-based rule, and you can see that there's target there of detecting at least a 1 meter squared object and a definition of well clear. So, compliance philosophy. I'm sure you all have also heard that if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, then every problem that you see looks like a nail. So around 2015, the FAA transitioned and embraced the compliance philosophy or the just culture. And that's really an understanding that our NAS is very complex. So non-compliance for reasons such as rusty pilot skills or lack of understanding, that occurs. But to address that with enforcement sets up a us versus them mentality, and it's against the SMS principles that we hold dear. So the FAA felt like the best way to correct errors due to flawed procedures, simple mistakes, lack of understanding, or diminished skills is through education, training, and counseling. This allows us to apply resources where it's needed, and that's towards the careless, the clueless, and the criminal. And this philosophy fits very well with the performance-based regulatory approach, which concentrates our resources on risk and problem solving. This will help us identify the correct potential hazards before they result in an incident or accident. So here you see the advantages of performance-based regulation. Encourages new technologies, it's proactive, allows for more efficient use of FAA resources, flexibility, and harmonization. There are some disadvantages. If the rule is not carefully drafted, it can be ambiguous, it could be vague, and hard to enforce. Generally, attorneys don't like performance-based regulation or principle-based regulations. So they have to be crafted very carefully, so to not allow too much flexibility, but then they do require significantly more and carefully drafted guidance material. So, are states ready? We believe that states are ready for implementation of a performance-based regulatory approach to RPAS operations. However, ultimately, the guiding principle is to use the right approach. This isn't an on-off switch. It's not a choose one and stick with one. You have to choose the right tool for the job. The regulator has to decide on the ultimate goal for the regulation under consideration. As a regulator, the FAA realizes that there are situations where one approach works better than another. However, with regard to RPAS operations, the FAA experience has been that a performance-based regulatory approach can be quite successful in managing regulations and assuring safety. So in closing, I'll say what aviators have been saying for decades, and it's not pleasant to say, but aviation regulations have grown out of someone else's tragedy. But with compliance philosophy, risk-based decision-making, and proactive training and education, hopefully that's a road we won't have to travel in development of robust RPAS regulations. So I'll end my presentation today by reading from a recent speech given by our acting administrator, Dan Elwell. He said, "As a regulator, we have to adapt an attitude of regulatory humility. We've got to get things done faster. The US government doesn't adapt very well to change. So while a big change like unmanned aircraft is happening as I speak, the FAA cannot make the mistake of thinking we have all the answers all the time. We have to work with industry to develop technology and solutions to our common problems. But ultimately, it's the responsibility of the FAA to ensure we have the appropriate standards in place to assure that airspace is safe for all users. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rochon. Certainly lots to think about, and we appreciate you sharing the FAA perspective, and we look forward to hearing what questions and comments that this talk will elicit from the room. So that's a quick reminder that you can use the app to send in your questions, and we'll get a chance at the end of the 4 presentations to have a fuller conversation with all of you. Next up on the podium to share his words of wisdom is Mr. Dilip Kumar, Joint General Manager of AATM with the Airport Authority of India. Mr. Kumar will help us progress in our understanding of the question of if states are ready for performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS operations. Mr. Kumar, you have the floor, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. On behalf of DGCA and Airports Authority of India, I thank the Chinese authorities and ICAO for inviting us to speak at this important event on a topic which is very relevant in today's context. Entry of unmanned aircraft systems or remotely piloted aircraft systems, or RPAS as we call it, into the highly regulated world of civil aviation has reset the parameters of safety and security and are making us work really hard to ensure that the aviation remains the safest mode of transport. The huge commercial advantage unmanned aircraft systems can deliver and the flexibility it offers makes it very difficult to ignore this relatively new entrant into the aviation world. Actually, passenger drones are not the future, not even the near future. They are actually the present. Regulations for enabling safe operations of RPAS in uncontrolled and controlled airspace have been published by many states. Many of these regulations are prescriptive in nature. That's rule-based. India has published its first set of regulations for civil RPAS operations 2 weeks back. This will be effective from the 1st of December this year, and focus more on low-level RPAS operations. My presentation attempts to discuss the merits and demerits of compliance-based and performance-based regulations with emphasis on RPAS operations. It will also talk about the steps states might need to take to migrate gradually into performance-based regulations. You all know this diagram. It's from 10019, which defines RPAS as an unmanned aircraft which is piloted from a remote pilot station. The document also states that although model aircraft and autonomous aircraft are unmanned aircraft, they are not included in the scope of the manual. Only RPAS is included. However, the present day context, states are faced with the following issues related with operation of RPAS. 1, mitigation of safety risks posed by RPAS to manned aircraft operations. We are all very aware of that. Number 2, enabling domestic and localized RPAS operations to reap full benefit of the unmanned aircraft system technology. 3, preparation for integration of unmanned aircraft, whether it is RPAS or even autonomous aircraft, into non-segregated airspaces, especially controlled airspace. The existing regulations for unmanned aircraft operations tend to focus more on low altitude, domestic, localized operations, that too in segregated mode, rather than aiming for operations at high altitude among manned aircraft. RPAS regulations. Many states have published regulations to manage unmanned aircraft operations. Mostly the regulations tend to focus on low-level airspace, small unmanned aircraft systems, daytime VLOS operations in segregated mode. Segregation is the key word now, whether it's segregation to accommodation to integration, it's a key word. Although we have the objective of full integration of unmanned aircraft systems into national airspace fully in our sites. Aviation System Block Upgrades, or ASBU, Block B on RPAS, talks about initial integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace. And B2 RPAS focusing more on RPAS certification process, standardizing C2 loss link procedures, and detect and avoid technology. B3 RPAS will aim for complete integration of RPAS in airspace and aerodrome operations. India has published the civil aviation requirements on civil RPAS operations on 27th August of this year, which will be effective from 1st of December. The regulations provide significant freedom for operations of smaller categories of RPAS at very low level in uncontrolled airspace. Now the big question, prescription or performance? Compliance-based or rule-based or prescriptive regulation is a regulation that specifies the requirements for mandatory methods of compliance. Such regulation stipulates how activities are to be performed, also specifying the procedures, qualifications, and the resources to be used to complete the function. Standards and rules are set for compliance. CBR is also supported by compliance-based oversight process to ensure compliance to the minimum requirements. This approach tends to be rigid, as innovation is not usually favored. Rules and methods for compliance are stipulated for every possible eventuality. CBR approach is also not very easily adaptable to dynamic situations which you are facing with the entrance of remotely piloted aircraft system into our aviation scenario. On the other hand, performance-based regulation is flexible, as it can lead to required objectives without specifying the method for achieving these goals. PBR and associated performance-based oversight, or PBO, process give emphasis on performance of stakeholders through achievements of measurable safety performance parameters or safety objectives. It may be argued that application of compliance-based regulations to RPAS operation is a one-size-fits-for-all approach. This phrase has been used many times here. As the size, shape, capabilities, and performance characteristics of RPAS vary widely. ICAO recommends that for safe integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace, performance characteristics of RPAS should suit the requirements of the airspace they plan to operate in. In short, they should actually perform at par with manned aircraft operations in the airspace. Thus, for instance, a rule-based regulation might stipulate carriage of, say, VHF sets, transponders, and collision avoidance systems on board a small quadcopter flying at 2,000 feet AGL. Whereas performance-based regulations, on the other hand, will give emphasis on performance of stakeholders through achievements of measurable safety performance parameters. These requirements will be published as acceptable level of safety performance, the status of which will be constantly assessed through internal audits and external oversight process. The factors for success of PBR. There are many factors, I'm just highlighting 3 of them. One is the level of maturity and effectiveness of the existing compliance-based regulations and associated oversight mechanism. The second one, the level of maturity of the state safety program and the SMSs, safety management systems of the concerned aviation organizations, and the depth to which just culture has imbibed into these organizations. The third one being the resources available for oversight of performance-based regulations, as PBO requires more intense oversight process and a higher level of competence in the oversight inspectors. Many states have published regulations for operation of UAS in respective states. ICAO manual actually gives guidance for international IFR RPAS operations. As such, globally, integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace is evolving gradually. Hence, while introduction of PBR and PBO in RPAS operations might hasten the process, it could also be counterproductive if the minimum requirements are forgotten and the focus is made only on the safety performance objectives. At this point in time, states may not be ready for a full migration into performance-based regulations. At the same time, many performance-based safety objectives can be interwoven into the existing compliance-based regulations, which can be used to accelerate the integration into non-segregated airspace. It may be ideal to have a mixture of compliance-based regulations and performance-based regulations. Still, such time the RPAS technology, procedures and associated personnel reach the sufficient level of maturity and competence for transitioning into a completely performance-based regulation and oversight process. The RPAS regulations in India, the Indian CAR, the Civil Aviation Requirement, provides regulations for safe and secure operation of civil remotely piloted aircraft systems in Indian airspace. Barring operation of nano RPAS, that's less than 250 grams, below 50 feet AGL, and micro RPAS below 200 feet AGL in uncontrolled airspace, RPAS operations are tightly regulated to ensure safety of manned aircraft operations. All RPAS in controlled airspace are required to obtain approval from air traffic control. RPAS operations are not allowed in no-drone zones, around airports, over military airspaces, and other security-sensitive installations across the state. AAI and DGCA are jointly developing a digital sky platform for registration of RPAS operators and remote pilots. The application will also help RPAS operators plan their flight profiles clear of the no-fly zones for drones. The digital platform will ensure that no civil RPAS can be launched in Indian skies unless approvals from all quarters are obtained, which include approvals from DGCA, from the ANSP, that's AAI, and the local administration. This functionality is called No Permission, No Takeoff, or NPNT. The app will be ready by the time the regulations become effective, that's 1st of December. Restructuring of the VLL airspace, which is typically below 1,000 feet or even 500 feet AGL, beyond the jurisdiction of the controlled airspaces, which is mostly used by players like manned or tethered balloons, kites, paragliders, paramotors, model aircraft, and now unmanned aircraft. Use of VLL airspace by manned aircraft is on the rise. In near future, the entire VLL airspace will be managed through UTM systems. India's regulation on operation of civil RPAS mandates ATC approval for all RPAS flights in controlled airspace. So we have a problem here. Control zones in India extend from ground to a specified height and laterally to a distance varying from 5 nautical miles to 30 nautical miles from the ARP. Thus, even at very low levels, up to a significant distance from the airport, ATC is obliged to provide services commensurate with Class D airspace. As an immediate measure, AAI is contemplating restructuring of CTR to release more VLL airspace for RPAS operations. Airspace below 700 feet AGL, beyond 5 nautical miles from the airport, can be safely classified as Class G or uncontrolled airspace. To summarize, India has followed a process of stakeholder consultation to formulate the first set of regulations for RPAS operation, and we probably are not fully ready to migrate immediately to a completely or fully performance-based regulations. Learning from experience, India would envisage a combination of prescriptive and performance-based regulations for a few years until commencement of integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace. Full transition into PBR and PBO will require much effort in terms of strengthening the SSP, SMSs, and imbibing just culture into the concerned stakeholder organizations, and also providing adequate resources for oversight functions. India pledges a continued support to ICAO in moving forward towards safe integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace. India is a member of Asia-Pacific Unmanned Aircraft System Task Force and its small working group, constituted to develop regional guidance material on unmanned aircraft system regulations, and will continue its contribution in all possible avenues for improving safety of RPAS operations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. I'm sure that this eloquent presentation will raise a number of comments and questions from our distinguished audience. And thanks again for sharing the Indian perspective. To help us continue our discussions this afternoon, I have the pleasure to welcome back to the podium Mr. Scott Duffy. As you'll recall, Mr. Duffy helped start our discussions yesterday morning when we looked at how best to respond to the rapid growth of the unmanned industry. This afternoon, Mr. Duffy, who is manager for RPAS operations with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority of Australia, will share the Australian experience with building a performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS operations. Mr. Duffy, you have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak twice. It's a real honor. It's a really, really interesting topic, performance-based regulatory systems. And we sit here and we ask ourselves, are states ready? Are we actually ever ready? I suppose is the question that you probably want to be asking. I think it's fair to say that drones crept into a lot of people's lives without too much notice. And I think that it's fair to say that the people in this room and the human race are one of the most adaptable races on this planet. So what does that actually mean for us? It means that every day we learn something new, something changes in our life, and we accept those challenges and we move on and we evolve. And really this is the philosophy by which I think that when we approach the challenges that we're faced here and now from an aviation safety system point of view, it's going to stand us in really good stead in terms of how we come up with the solutions. So I'm going to cover a few things in this presentation. Really what I want to do is focus about the challenges that we presently face from an Australian point of view and how we've addressed them. We also want to share with you some of the future challenges. And again, it's how we actually address them, not about what we're actually addressing, because we've had many discussions for many months and years about what we see are the issues. And really now we're trying to put in place certain strategies to actually address them. Now, I can't take credit for this, but in 2002, Australia did introduce some drone legislation. It was drafted in 1999, and it took a few years before it actually was made. So you can imagine some of the assumptions that were made back then. But really what that means from Australia's point of view is that we need to change. We have put some change in place, and from our point of view, we've put in place some change in 2016. We followed that up with a direction which helped standardize legislation. But one of the things that we are fundamentally aware of is that we need to come up with a mechanism by which we can provide a balance of performance-based legislation overlaid with compliance, because one size does not fit all when we're dealing with drones. So we're introducing a 4-tier of legislation, which is a manual of standards, and that really allows us to create that level of flexibility. There's many learnings along the way. We can sit here and we can talk about the evolution of a piece of legislation, but without engaging people in this room, without engaging operators, without engaging the people who actually require the services as well to be provided, regulators, associations, our friends at ICAO, JARIS, and many others. And this is one of the benefits that we do. We're starting to take that information, shape how our system is actually going to look and how we're going to meet the intent of what the aviation system will look like from an Australian point of view and also from an international point of view as well. I think I spoke very briefly about sector risk profiles, and one of the things that we did was we brought all these people together, and it was really encouraging. I suppose we see that as a great way to engage with the industry. Sometimes regulators get a little bit of bad press because sometimes we're perceived as not listening to industry. So I suppose this is one of the strategies that we've adopted, and it's been really, really quite successful. But with that engagement comes the next step. Then how do we roll that into the next body of work? So developing a roadmap, and I'm pleased to see that there's many states and associations that actually are really starting to talk in roadmap language. And what that actually articulates is it's to their organization and to their members and interested parties, this is the direction that we are going to go on. And we actually are in the process of developing a roadmap. So that's really, really positive from Australia's point of view. And you'll find that it's not too different to too many other roadmaps. So that's really encouraging as well. One of the key things that is contributing to the roadmap is CASA did a drone safety review in 2017, and as part of that discussion paper, there was a few key elements that we really wanted to focus on. Now, I spoke about the fantastic response we got. I think it was the highest response Australia's received for any discussion paper. So I suppose that's really good. It's quite topical, it's quite political, and everybody is interested in drones. It's fantastic. So some of the key things that we spoke about were registration, about geofencing, counter-drone technology, and training and proficiency. They were the 4 key elements that we were really encouraging people to respond to us on. And I think they're topics that are being discussed by many people, but it's encouraging to say that we have to move forward as a state, and we actually have to set in place what our requirements are from a state's point of view, but also from meeting the intent of SARPs and other associations' requirements as well. Ooh, technology failed. So some of the things that I'm just going to touch on here is to do with the manual of standards. Now, I know that we've spoken about some of the philosophies from the 2 previous speakers about what does it actually mean from a performance-based point of view. Now, it's getting the balance right. We know there's a diversity of operators in Australia and across the globe. There are some who are sole traders, small businesses. However, they have high-performing drones with and remotely piloted aircraft with great capability. We have large organizations who have a fleet of aircraft and multiple fleets of aircraft, and they will do a variety of different types of operations, but they have the capability to go beyond our borders as well. So some of the things that we're really trying to focus on is to provide a flexibility so that we can support industry, give them the enough latitude where the rule actually exists. And we've been operating BVLOS in Australia for so many years. And we operate a SORA version of that through JARIS, and we've done 2 test cases, and we've provided some feedback to JARIS on the success of that. And it doesn't come without its challenges, I'll admit. And what that means is, from CASA's point of view, is that we need to be more transparent in how we communicate the needs and wants. Allowing people to operate at night with greater ease, allowing people to operate in controlled airspace within 3 nautical miles of an aerodrome is a hugely complex body of work, but it's something that we want to try and demystify along the way. Training, it's one of the underpinning features that I think that everybody probably agrees that it's one of the cornerstones, I suppose, of our aviation safety sort of philosophies and principles. And it's important to us, so we're really, really encouraging the training standards to improve as well along the way. So when we talk about challenges, it's about breaking some of these barriers and actually then putting a solution in place. There's a very long list of things there, and people have touched on many of these items over the last couple of days, and they will continue to talk about these. But the key element from our perspective is that we're turning these into what we need to talk about now, to actually creating how we're going to develop the solutions. And that's really, really encouraging from our point of view, and we're sharing with industry as much as we possibly can along the way. In understanding how we set some of those legislative requirements, we're actually starting to address industry more from a client-based point of view and understanding what their needs and wants are, and understanding that we're generally the organization that will set the regulatory framework for safety. We know that one size does not fit all, and that's something that became apparent very early on. So we know that we actually serve many masters from an industry point of view. And we do know that compliance and prescriptive legislation is important. We do know that performance-based legislation is equally important, but we also understand that there has to be a process by which somebody can move from one to the other and select what's generally more appropriate at a certain point of view. So this is where we have to take this non-traditional approach. And setting that pathway is something that we've done through our roadmap. Now, I forgot to tell you that there's actually a quiz with this presentation. Now, if you can spot the typo on one of my slides, the winner gets a prescription, okay? So in closing, there's a couple of things that I really want to sort of highlight is that we speak of integration and performance, that I sometimes feel that there's almost like an end point. It's about, watching, the 100 meters final. It's like, okay, we crossed the line, we've got there, thank you very much. And then we can all take a breath. The way that I think that we want to approach this is that there is actually no end point. We all sit here, we're part of an aviation system that has been around for considerably longer than anybody in this room, I'm pleased to say. And from our point of view, that's the key part. I think it's the fact that we are adaptable to change, and we are faced with some many challenges, and challenges that we are facing head on and doing fantastically, I may add. But I think that with the technology and the organizations that are probably coming from a non-traditional aviation organization into the drone world, they're presenting a lot of these challenges for us. But with challenges come solutions. Some of the current solutions will work, and some won't. In certain situations, many won't. So change, I believe, is inevitable. So at the beginning of my presentation, I said, are we ever ready? And I think one of the things that we have to focus on is we have to be ready to act. We also have to be ready to predict, but we also have to be ready to make a decision and then allow that decision to be part of the system, and we monitor the performance of it. And we are allowed to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. As with yesterday's presentation, this certainly helps move the conversation forward, and I'll look forward to hearing the audience's questions and comments on your many interesting observations from the Australian experience. And I do note from the audience that not too many are sitting autonomously, and you're all fairly awake after a nice lunch, so we look forward to our next presentation, which is Mr. Paweł Szymański, Director of Unmanned Aircraft Department of the Civil Aviation Authority of Poland. Mr. Szymański will help us build a shared understanding on the question of building a performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS operations. Are states ready? By sharing his thoughts on the experience of integrating drones into Polish airspace while keeping the skies safe. Mr. Szymański, if you please, you have the floor, sir.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's my second time in China, first time in Chengdu, and for me it's a great honor to be here with you today. Poland, as an United Europe member state, is subject to EASA, European Aviation Safety Agency, oversight. And the EASA is developing at this moment new regulations for drones, for remotely piloted aircraft systems, which probably next year will cover all European Union member states. Due to this, the European drone market will be unified, which should lead to economic growth in the sector of the European Union economy. I hope so. In this panel, I'm the only representative of the European Union member states. Therefore, I would like to express my view on the solutions suggested by the EASA. The suggested solutions are performance-based regulations. EASA suggestions define three main types of operations: open, specific, and certified. The requirements included in them depend on the risk level related to a given flight operations. Such an approach is flexible, and in general it should work very well when it comes to drones, because the regulations are simple for simple operations and more complicated in the case of more complicated operations. And the most advanced category will be the certified category. It is treated equally to manned aviation, and the requirements for it will be equally high in order to ensure an appropriate safety level. This is the future of the Polish legislation. This is the future of the European Union legislation for drones, which will soon become a fact. The United Europe member states will have to prepare for it. However, it seems that the direction in which EASA goes is the best one for drones, and it's compliant with a general global trend. The basic issue discussed in this panel is the answer to the question if states are ready for this new type of regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, from my point of view, it is something new. Our previous experiences were based on quite a different basis. However, there are some common points which will facilitate their implementations. In Poland, during the last years, a legal system was developed which is very friendly for drone users, for recreational users, and for commercial users. So they just can fly. Today, drones in Poland are used for various applications. We estimate that in Poland, over 100,000 drones fly. Trust me, for my country, it's a big number. The Polish Civil Aviation Authority has issued over 8,000 licenses for drone pilots used for commercial, because you need to obtain a remote pilot license in Poland for commercial applications. We have over 80 training centers for drone pilots, which are approved and overseen by CAA. And now, Polish legislation in place. When it comes to the regulations, the first Polish regulations on unmanned aircraft have been included in the Polish aviation law in 2011. Introduced a solution according to which the performance of flights of unmanned aircraft is permitted when certain requirements concerning the aircraft and air personnel qualifications are met. In our opinion, the most important thing was knowledge and skills. So we have quite good developed implementing rules regarding remote pilot's licensing. which determines the terms and conditions for obtaining qualifications to conduct drone operations. To get the qualification in Poland is required to pass a theoretical and practical training course carried out by a qualified entity and pass theoretical tests and skill tests conducted by a CAA examiner. The system works, and as a result, there is a small number of incidents with drones in Poland. Most often, they are caused by people using drones for recreation who do not have appropriate knowledge about the airspace. During that courses, the Polish drone pilots learn how to assess the risk and to decide about the parameters of the performance flight operations. These abilities and knowledge will allow them to implementing the performance-based regulations in the future in their everyday flights. I hope so. Another important thing is, and another important activity of the Polish CAA is a safety promotion. It allows to reach people operating drones for recreational purposes, but who more and more often own drones with huge abilities. Safety promotion is one of the common points between the Polish regulations and the regulations suggested by the ICAO, especially for the open category. Another thing, it's also very important to take advantage of available technology and tools. In Poland, one of the mobile applications become UTM foundation as a natural development of popular situational awareness tool. It's also orchestrate flight permissions to civil and military ANSP and provide two-way non-verbal communications between ATC and drone operator and the drone itself. And it will be presented to this audience on Thursday, so it could be a very interesting thing for you. At present, process of drone radar UTM certification has begun by Polish Air Navigation Service Agency. And it seems that this type of solutions, drone radar, Unifly, AirMap, anything else, will be crucial for ensuring safety in the airspace in the future. They will also facilitate the implementation of the PBR. And now, ladies and gentlemen, on the hand of our regulations are different from those suggested by the ICAO. On the other hand, they make a basis for, they make a good basis, I think, for effective implementations of the new regulations from the ICAO. Risk assessment, which is crucial for the European Union regulation, is nothing new to us, but the drone environment will definitely need additional knowledge, additional skills, and workshops, especially in this area. Till today, the biggest demand for drones has been in visual line of sight operation, but today, the most important thing and the next step is very low level BVLOS, very low level beyond visual line of sight operations, regulations for U-space, and regulations for automatic flight operations. Risk-based approach or performance-based has been used for more than 2 years to create in Poland beyond visual line of sight procedures, which will become effective, I hope so, in this year. The new approach will under procedures supervision of CAA law beyond visual line of sight flights in non-segregated airspace. We believe that this will be a trigger for massive commercial services in next year in Poland. That would be possible without close cooperation between CAA, ANSP, various ministries, industry, and drone society. Ladies and gentlemen, are we ready? I think, yes, we are ready. PBR is I think it's the best way for drones community at this moment. So I hope so. Everything's going to be all right in drones in the next years. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention at this moment. And I want to thank my friends from Poland for helping me preparing this presentation, especially Mr. Jarek Rupiewicz from CAA Poland and Mr. Paweł Senator from one of our CAA experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Szymański. And what a wonderful thought-inducing presentation to conclude our 4 presentations today. These 4 presentations certainly help us build that shared situational awareness of where we are in terms of building a performance-based regulatory environment for RPAS operations. Are states ready? But the key to that shared situational awareness may be in the questions that you pose. As such, let's take the time today to hear you out and have these experts with me on stage today weigh in on your comments and questions. And to start us off, what I'd like to do is we do have a number of questions, but I'd like to take the ones that are more general in nature that perhaps all 4 of the presenters can weigh in on. And as a first question, and perhaps we'll start with Mr. Rochon and then we'll go to the left. The question is, can you share with us some concrete examples of how industry is being included in your state, such as information sharing, pilot projects, etc., to fill in for the gaps in regulator expertise or experience? Mr. Rochon, if you please.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your question. It's I think the FAA realized early on with this industry that this type of information sharing was critical to progress in the UAS. In RPAS community. Early on, Part 107, shortly after Part 107 was published, and even before it was published, the FAA had established the Pathfinder programs you may be familiar with, CNN for operations over people, BNSF for linear infrastructure inspections, and Precision Hawk for precision agriculture. So right after Part 107 was published, they were actually the first waivers that were issued, and part of the agreement there with respect to these Pathfinder programs was information and data sharing. Later, after these Pathfinder programs sunset, the FAA entered into PSPs, or Partnership for Safety Plans, with various operators to do the exact same thing, where the FAA worked in close coordination to get through the operational approval process. And then, of course, most recently, the best example is the Presidential Integration Pilot Program, which was a partnership between state and local governments, tribal governments, with industry, and also working side by side with the FAA to fast track operational approvals. But what was unique about the Presidential Integration Pilot Program is that it's from a perspective of the communities, which is different than the programs that we've had in the past. So we're really expecting some fruitful information from that partnership as well. And then not to be forgotten are the various UAS test sites around the country where operators can engage in higher risk operations like beyond visual line of sight, test different systems, equipment, processes, and procedures. And that also is yielding a wealth of data that we expect to eventually be implemented in our regulatory processes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rochon. Certainly, it's encouraging to hear the close cooperation between industry stakeholders and the federal regulator. Perhaps, Mr. Kumar, you can weigh in on the experience in India on the question once again, which is, can you share some concrete examples of how industry has been included in your state to fill in the gaps for regulatory expertise and experience? Mr. Kumar, if you please.
Thank you, Claude. Actually, India we are actually dealing with 3 issues parallelly. Rather, one is the regulations, number 2 is the counter-drone systems. There was another question on that. So the counter-drone systems, and the third one, we have constituted a high-level task force for at the ministerial level to deal to tap the potential of unmanned aircraft system technology. In all the 3 arenas, we have stakeholder participation. The digital sky platform I was mentioning, which is used for, is something similar to drone radar and the lands, which is going to be used for registration of drones, plus the flight profiling and all of the stuff. It was tested with industry participation. It was tested and twice actually, and industry was involved, and the technical specifications for the app would be released immediately within a week or so that industry can actually update themselves. The manufacturers can, upgrade their systems to be compliant with the system. And then regarding the counter-drone technology, we are still grappling with the idea of having counter-drone systems at airports for protection of airport proximities. So we had a demonstration of the counter-drone technology by a few vendors, which also showed tremendous participation from the industry. And the question is very, very relevant, actually, to fill the gaps in regulatory expertise. That actually is very well put. I think all the states are facing the same problem. When the the technology is growing at extremely fast pace, the regulators might find it difficult to keep pace with the growing technology. And then the high-level task force, which the government has constituted, has industry participation all around. The task force is 3 working groups, subcommittees, we call it, on airspace management, regulations, and manufacture. All the 3 subcommittees have members from the industry, so that we keep ourselves updated with the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. It's certainly very positive to hear that the industry is participating in the working groups, and perhaps to add to our understanding, Mr. Duffy, if you can weigh in on the Australian experience.
Thank you very much. Really interesting question, one that's really encouraging because engaging with industry and stakeholder engagement is key. I touched on a few examples that we share with the Australian industry, and that actually goes beyond just Australia. But I sort of sat here and I wrote a list, which is really encouraging. So that means there's more than 2 things on the list generally. So we talk about the sector profiles. We're introducing a service delivery transformation product where we need to engage with industry to understand what their needs and wants are from a business point of view, and engaging with the regulator. So they share their thoughts and ideas with us on those elements. We have direct links into 2 key associations within Australia, and we engage them for their input on certain elements like demystifying BV laws, or when we were helping to construct our annual survey in which we engage with industry. We also have an executive committee which is chaired by the CEO of CASA, but it's industry facing, and that allows input from industry through key bodies, and there's tasking back to industry on that element as well. Largely some stuff to do with RPAS as well.
That certainly helps us out, so perhaps we can come back to it if you have any other points, or would you like to add some?
Oh, the only other couple of things are really that we don't just limit it to the regulation part, but obviously with our Office of Airspace Regulation, understanding the needs and wants about constructing and the design elements in the future for drones.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Duffy. Perhaps Mr. Szymański can weigh in on the experience in Poland.
The drones community, drones industry in Poland is very, very active. And we work together all the time. We have a lot of meetings, conferences, workshops. It's very important for us, and it's very important for industry and community, and I think they love us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Szymański. These are great questions, and we have a number of other questions to get through in the few minutes we have left, so let's continue. The question being posed to all panelists again, and we'll do it in reverse order this time, is what are your views concerning an appropriate regulatory regime for unmanned aircraft above 25 kilograms? Should all of such unmanned aircraft be subject to regulations such as manned aircraft? Some of the lighter unmanned aircraft in this weight category may not have the complexity similar to manned aircraft, therefore posing some challenges. Mr. Szymański, if you please.
Can you repeat the question?
So I'll try to summarize essentially the context that's been given by the question is that what are the appropriate regulatory regime for unmanned aircraft above 25 kilograms, and whether that regime should be similar to what we're seeing for manned aircraft. That's essentially the questions, if I understood that correctly.
Above 25 kilograms, yeah?
25 kilograms has been proposed here as the weight category, or above it? Yes.
In Poland, to fly unmanned aircraft above 25 kilograms, you must obtain permission for flight. You must register your aircraft, and you need to obtain, some process from CAA to can conduct your flights, and I think it's quite good at this moment. We will see what will be next with specific category from the EASA regulations, but at this moment it works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Szymański. Perhaps Mr. Duffy, you could weigh in.
Thank you. The current regulatory regime in Australia requires that somebody operating above 25 kilos holds a remote pilot license. So they've undergone approved training, they hold an operator certificate in support of that, and then depending on the type of operation, they would more than likely require additional approvals or instruments from CASA, whether that's above 400 feet or BVLOS. We don't require certification in the traditional sense of type certification of the aircraft until an aircraft goes above 150 kilos.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Mr. Kumar, if you have any thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Now, we are actually grappling with the idea of whether to categorize drones or the unmanned systems based on weight or based on the risk they pose. So let's forget about the weight part. If we actually take the risk-based approach, CAT ABC, as EASA has put, I think we get the answer to the question. See, it's based on the risk. Like, you want to fly a 25-kilogram unmanned aircraft near airports, then I think you get the answer yourself. You need to have stringent regulations. You need to treat them at par with manned aircraft. If you're going to operate them beyond your airspaces where at a low level or maybe 10,000 feet or something like that, then probably you can have a little more, relaxed regulations. So the answer lies in the categorization. And if you're going to follow the risk-based approach, I think it's going to be quite easy for us to find solutions to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Rochon, if you please.
Yeah, in the United States, simply the fact that an unmanned aircraft is above 25 kilograms or above 55 pounds doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily be subject to manned aircraft regulations. The only reason that's that way today is because that's where the regulatory applicability is with respect to Part 107. So anything above that weight would then fall into our manned aircraft operations, just regulatory structure, just because there's no alternative. And that's what I was mentioning before about having the exemptions. certain regulations. But for us, it's all going to come down to the type of operation that's being conducted. It's going to the pilot requirements, the training requirements, the aircraft certification requirements, and the operational rules are all going to depend on what operation is being conducted. As an example, the desire in the FAA is to, if, for example, an aircraft above 55 pounds is going to conduct air carrier operations, meaning transporting property from point A to point B, then that would be subject to the Part 135 regulations, just like a manned aircraft operation. We think those standards have served us well with the manned aircraft side, so I think those will be adjusted, as I discussed, performance-based to fit remote pilot aircraft systems.
Thank you very much, and perhaps, Mr. Rochon, you can keep the microphone. We have another question for all presenters, and the question essentially is, could you provide details as to what stage your state is in drafting performance-based regulation? And it might be helpful for the audience to frame it in terms of we're 1/3 of the way or 50% of the way and where we'd like to be, or in that sort of way, as well as provide some details of the progress thereon. So, Mr. Rochon.
Well, I'll do the best I can with that one. That's a loaded one. But shortly on the heels of Part 107, there was certainly a desire of the FAA to go into the next stage of rulemaking. The expanded operations or regulatory rulemaking team for beyond visual line of sight operations quickly was established, but it wasn't long after that we heard from our security agencies, public safety agencies about concern when it came to remote ID, security, tracking, and so that rulemaking was put on hold until those solutions could come in place. So right now we're still moving on a track with respect to operations over people and operations at night, but still the remote pilot aircraft ID and tracking requirements are still a must prior to those going. So it's hard to give an answer right now, but I think the good news is that that rulemaking is progressing. It's working its way through the various coordination processes within the government. So we hope to have some more news on that soon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rochon. I understand from your comments that the FAA is well on the path towards performance-based regulations, but there's still a few intersections to get through. So thank you for that. Mr. Kumar, if you please, from the perspective of India.
Actually, we are just into the first set of regulations. So it's a sort of, very basic sort of regulations with drones can fly up to 400 feet AGL, and more of rule-based. You can understand the first set of regulations would always be something like that. So we have specified the categories by weight. We have specified the equipment requirements to fly in controlled airspace, which is quite stringent. You require a barometric sensor on board and things like that. So, but the next set of regulations, the car number 2, the version 2 would be soon be published, because as somebody was telling, the technological advancement of drones is something like 18 months. You have to keep your regulations updated. So we have to do that, more so because it's very of limited scope. People have already started talking about autonomous flights and BVLOs and radio LiDAR setup and all that stuff. So then we need to upgrade ourselves. So at present, we are not very much into performance-based regulations as far as RPAS regulations are concerned, but we hope that we will be upgrading it quite soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Duffy, to add in on the Australian experience.
Thank you. Interesting question. I think in some regard we already do offer an element of that. And it's really hard to put a definition or a number that says 25, 50. I think it's fair to say that the evolution of performance-based regulation will exactly that. It will evolve. It'll evolve with technology. It will evolve with other technologies within airspace as well. So I think we've already started on that pathway in the journey. But one of the key things I think that we have identified is that the system caters for elements, case by case, people doing certain activities. The multiplicity of the system or within the system doesn't currently exist, and that's where harmonization of policy and technology solutions will come together, where will allow the multiplicity element to actually happen in a much safer environment.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Perhaps Mr. Szymański, you could weigh in.
In fact, evolving technology is changing everything. Yesterday, the most important thing was, regulations for visual line of sight operation, because that was most popular. Tomorrow or today, we need regulations for autonomous flights, for use space, automatic flights. I think technology is very important in all of this, in regulations. UTM is the key, and UTM is something what will changing everything. Maybe tomorrow, maybe for 2, 3, 4 years, but it's the key, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Szymański. So what I understand from all panelists is that while we're making progress along the path towards performance-based regulation, that there's still a few intersections to go through, and certainly we don't know what we don't know, and so we're here to listen to you and to get your advice and guidance and to build that future together. One of the points that was raised by Mr. Rochon just now, it was in terms of security concerns, and it ties in nicely to one of the questions we have here from the audience, which is, in short, are there any plans in your state to regulate anti-drone systems? And so perhaps, Mr. Szymański, as you have the microphone, you can start us off.
In Poland, no. No, at this moment, no. Not yet.
Not yet. Thank you very much. Mr. Duffy.
We actually have legislation that says that you can't interfere with an aircraft. So from CASA's point of view, it's not something that we have on our radar at this moment in time, pun intended, because it's the counter-drone radar. Okay. We do know that there's people obviously wanting to monitor drones, and there are examples of that being used within Australia in private capacities.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kumar. Thank you. Actually, as I told earlier, India was exploring the possibility of, rather the feasibility of installing counter-drone systems at busy airports. The work is on for preparation of the qualitative requirements, but nothing concrete. We are just exploring possibilities. We had a demonstration by a few vendors. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Mr. Rochon.
Yeah, I don't think there's any plans to regulate that in the United States, not from an FAA perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well that certainly helps us down towards this question. Perhaps reflecting on the questions that were posed and the discussions we've had here together, is there any questions you'd like to pose to each other to further our understanding as a room? Just to mix things up a bit as we head towards the break. I think we're all good. Putting people on the spot. Yes, exactly. So I'll tell you what we'll do is I'll have there was a few other questions that were very specific to some details of the state progress, and I certainly invite you all to come and talk to our excellent presenters during the break and further your understanding of where they are on that path. And I thank you for your keen participation, as well as thank all the presenters for the wonderful words of wisdom they shared with us today. And so to hand it back to the Master of Ceremonies, I thank you, and I think we're shortly heading towards a break. So thank you very much to all, and I applaud you, the audience, and their presenters.
Thanks again, gentlemen, and we're ready for our coffee break, so we'll see all of you back here around just before 4 o'clock. Speakers come just a little bit before then. Thank you.